Welcome back to Good Revenue. We thought it might be interesting to bring back a former guest, Jim Stevenson, to talk to us about some of his predictions and analysis about what we can expect in 2025. 2024 brought us economic challenges, geopolitical tensions, advanced technology, and some really wild electoral results in countries all around the world, including the United States. And some of the forces on the horizon for 2025 include AI, digital transformation, potentially trade wars. It's going to be lively. So with that, welcome back, Jim. We're excited to have you here again.
Neeta, it's great to be back. I'm looking forward to this. It's going to be a fun conversation as always.
Let's start with technology. It's obviously a vast set of issues. AI has been the hot topic for the last 2 years. It's projected to contribute up to $15.7 trillion to the global economy by 2030, according to Euromonitor. That is just 5 years away, which is wild to think about. How are you seeing the landscape in the next year when it comes to AI? And specifically, how do you envision AI agents might transform the landscape?
We could spend the next week talking about this, to be honest. I'm very bullish on AI. I'm more bullish than most people. Sam Altman suggested that they're going to have artificial general intelligence next year. And I think that's a game changer. We've also got to the border now where you cannot use the internet to train AI. It's already trained in everything that's on the internet. So fundamentally, how we think about things has to change so that we can continue to train AI. And that's a kind of seismic shift for everyone. But the reality for most people is AI agents. It's the agents that we will be interacting with that will be our interface into all of this world. I was talking to one company that was in Scandinavia. They built an agent to help marketing agencies do their stuff. They launched 3 months ago. They're already at 300,000 ARR. And that's in 3 months. It's just the speed of change here is just unbelievable. I think it's all going to be driven by the AI agents for the vast majority of us. And that's where it becomes really interesting because agents will become more sophisticated. You'll be able to stack agents as we get more confidence in the agents. So if you're a big corporation, you will have your agent that will do something. But then after 2 or 3 months, you might find that you go from having an agent that will help you with customer service to having an agent that will do customer service. And it will become more autonomous as the year goes on. And obviously that will be the leading companies using this. I think this is such a seismic change that every company will have to be there or they will have to scramble to catch up to be there. So I'm seeing the autonomous agents coming in. I'm seeing agents being used as decision-making. And I think that's across the majority of the Fortune 500 companies. And then along with that, the infrastructure has to come with it. Energy is going to be a big challenge for us. We don't have enough energy to drive all of this at the moment. So energy has to be factored into all of this. Where are we getting the energy from? Amazon are producing their own chips. Does that mean NVIDIA is no longer going to be dominant? No. NVIDIA is still dominant. They just can't produce enough. So our companies of the scale of Amazon, Apple, they have no choice now but to make their own chips because the supply is not there.
What do you see then as the balance between automation through AI agents or autonomous decision-making through AI agent and human decision-making in these organizations?
I think some things will always come down to a human, and it's not always sensible. I did see some research that said an AI doctor is way more accurate than a human doctor. We just don't have the competence in an AI doctor yet. So the stats aren't proving out how we as emotional beings are acting. And I think that's the same. Customer service would be another example. I think for lots of customer service, AI will just take over. But if it's something much more complete, much more emotional, much more challenging, then I do want to talk to someone. So I think that's a whole new world. That balance between human and automation, I think it's very dependent on timeframes. If you're looking at 20 years, AI will do the vast majority of things for us, I think. And that then brings in a whole new society of how do we do things? How do you keep the general population of a country occupied? What is it they're doing? How do you give them salaries? How do you make them feel valued? How do they have hope for a better life? All of those things are coming and we have to have those conversations. I don't think that's coming next year, though, thankfully.
Do you see any job displacement or other adverse effects from AI as near as next year? Or do you think some of that is farther out?
I think we're starting to see some of the job displacement. I don't think we're seeing people being fired and being replaced by AI. What I think is a slowdown in the job market. I think people aren't being hired as quickly. And I think that's partly because of the election in the US, the world economic geopolitical factors. But I can easily see, rather than employing an extra 3 people next year in a small company, we'll see how we get on with AI for 6 months. And if that works, great. If not, we'll employ people. So I think that's starting to come through in the workforce at the moment, but it's just not wholesale. AI will become more proactive. And that productivity will mean I can be sitting at home watching some TV program on a Sunday evening. AI will recognize that there is an advert on, so will interrupt me during the advert and say, "You've not ordered your weekly groceries this week. Do you want me to order them for you?" And then beyond that, it will go into a world whereby I noticed from your CVS loyalty card, Walgreens loyalty card, you bought a cream for a rash. Do you want me to change your washing up powder to something that is more sensitive to your skin this week so that you've got something that won't quite affect you? I can see that happening easily in the next 6-12 months. Not everyone will be comfortable with it. We'll see startups kind of working these things that are way more proactive, way more assistance for our lifetime.
Building on AI, let's talk a little bit about cybersecurity. How will the cybersecurity landscape evolve as AI is integrated into more, let's say, technology, businesses, workflows, et cetera?
Whether there's a human doing something on your infrastructure or an AI doing something on your infrastructure, I think it's still your infrastructure that you need to secure. I think where my concern at the moment is coming from with AI and security is the fact that AI is now good enough that I can have an avatar of me. So you create an avatar of me, you send it to my mother on Facebook. She thinks she's got a message from me saying, "I've just been arrested, I'm in prison. Can you help? You need to phone this number and pay my bail money," or whatever it is. And just to be clear to the whole audience, I've never been arrested. I'm out there. But you can see that type of AI, that deep fake, that misinformation becoming significantly more. We can do 100,000 pieces of content in a minute or 2 minutes, but with AI, we can flood the market with misinformation. So where at the moment you may get 3 or 4 spam emails a day, 20 spam emails a day, Google's good at catching it. I think Google has to go away and catch up. Microsoft have to go away and catch up in this. But the speed of change is that there's going to be months when they have not caught up and we are all exposed. I saw something earlier on this week where due to deep fakes, AI deep fakes being so good now, that they're recommending that as a family, you should have a safe word. So that if a deep fake does email my mother and say I've been arrested, send bail money, and she can easily say, "What's the safe word?" And then that's between us. We all have to be way more aware that you're not going to be able to detect a fake as easily as you could for the last 5 or 10 years. And so we do need to put other things in place. And because that's happening in the consumer world, I think businesses need to react to how they resolve those issues, how they support those issues. How do I know when my bank phones me up that it is my bank? And they say they'll never ask for my password. That's great. But I think those processes and policies need to change. So factor authentication needs to come in, but I know that you can already spoof someone's phone. So all of these things will have to change fundamentally because we now have AI at scale, being able to emulate someone perfectly. And I'm going to say perfectly. I don't think anyone now disputes, although I don't know that anyone's officially said it. The Turing test has now been broken. 70% of people would now believe they're talking to a human being, even though it's AI. So I think all of those things will have to come in to help protect people as we go. Otherwise, we're all being exposed.
This week, Google reported serious advances in quantum computing, which, according to some of the industry reports that I've seen, has real implications for AI if that is technology that can be commercialized and applied. There are still some real questions about the accuracy of quantum computing results, and that's clearly a huge barrier to adoption. Do you see quantum computing having an effect as early as 2025?
Well, sure, it will have an effect as early as 2025. We're going away from this kind of research mindset concept of what quantum computing is into having real world examples that can do things. So I think quantum computing will have a fundamental effect, but we will still be trying to figure out how we make that work. IBM will have one, Google will have one, Apple will have one, and they'll be experimenting with it. I also imagine the pharmaceutical industry will be using it extensively. They've gone through a bit of a beating up the last few years with a lot of their patents expiring. So they'll be desperate to get any kind of advantage on new patents that they can do. I'd be shocked if there aren't one or two financial organizations probably partnering with Google to actually use quantum computing in finance. Climate change would be another huge one for something like quantum computing. Purely because it is so quick at processing things, because fundamentally it is a different mindset to how we're used to computing's working. And then the really big one, going back to what we were talking about with cybersecurity, this is where I do think companies are exposed. A quantum computing can just bash your network constantly, and it'd be minutes, 3, 4, 5 minutes, and it would have broke your password, it would broke your security, because it is such a different mindset in how it's doing things. And I don't know that anyone has actually thought about how they would protect themselves from that. I think that's going to keep a lot of CTOs and CIOs awake at night.
Yeah, to your point, I think encryption is a huge potential target. And for what I understand, so is cryptocurrency. For the folks out there banking on crypto, there's a really interesting question of what the implications might be if quantum computing is applied. That's an interesting one to watch. So that's a great one. One last topic before we pivot. There have obviously been some pretty significant investments in the last couple of years in sovereign digital infrastructure. And there are growing concerns about data sovereignty. I know this is something that you have also been tracking. What do you think is driving this trend towards data localization?
I think every company is going to want a sovereign cloud. And I think that's an old-fashioned mindset. They want to protect everything within their infrastructure. I remember working with a large consumer brand, and they wanted me to create a digital asset management system that protected all of their digital assets. And it blew my mind that we're actually paying people to distribute these as adverts, but we wanted to protect them within our own environment. So I think it's a bit of that mindset of, if we have it internally, we need to protect it. We need to have a level of security around about it that probably not everything needs. But when you get to governments, when you get into big corporations, when you get into these things, I think they all want to be able to protect their cloud infrastructures, to allow them to use the benefits of cloud, and probably to bring data into the cloud, their sovereign cloud, but not allow any of their data out. So they don't want to have it on the internet where it can be used to train LLMs, but they will want to have it internal so it can train their LLM. So I think sovereign cloud will go along with sovereign AI. I know one company in the Caribbean, they have a sovereign cloud solution. They're now actually working on a sovereign AI solution, whereby I think they're using Neeta's Llama. You can actually have your own secure infrastructure, your own secure data, your own secure AI for you and your organization, or you and your country, without worrying about any of your data and any of your confidential information leaking out into the world. So I think that's going to happen more and more. I also know, obviously, the military are looking at that as well. I think that will be quite a big marketplace for infrastructure providers, if they can get qualified and get all the certifications, so that they've got a robust solution.
Yeah, it's so interesting because what I'm also hearing you say too is it does seem as though there's a real pendulum swing back to fragmentation after decades really of globalization and increased cooperation and collaboration. So I wonder a little bit about what the consequences are of that. Some of the data that I just saw from Euromonitor indicates that 54% of respondents in their annual survey expect moderate short-term instability, while 63% anticipate more turbulent conditions over the next 10 years. That number, if anything, sounds maybe a little bit low to me. Just this past week, the government of Syria collapsed. I think a lot of people actually think that's a positive sign, given how brutal that dictator has been. There's a lot of instability in Iran, Russia. There's still obviously wars raging in Ukraine, in Israel, Gaza. It's really a time of a lot of conflict. What are some of your predictions for the effect of this instability Are there any emerging economies that you think are actually going to be the beneficiaries of some of this instability?
The chaos that we're going into is going to be with us for a while. I think instability, I think complexity, I think ambiguity are all words that I would use to describe the next 5 or 10 years. I don't think that is ever going to stop being the norm now. And it's not just because of the wars in Syria's government falling in Gaza and Israel and Russia and Ukraine. I think there's always going to be something. But I think we've come into this world whereby technology is moving so quickly, countries aren't catching up quickly enough. And so I think from a business point of view, we will constantly be in this world of not quite being sure of what we can do in one country and not what we can do in another. We've got to have a different solution here. The way the world works is slightly different when we cross this border. And I think that's just going to be the way life is. I think with Trump, like him or loathe him, the one thing that we're guaranteed is he's going to disrupt things. That could be positive. I don't think it will be. I think most businesses like stability, they like known. And I don't think Trump is particularly good for known. He likes that complexity to be added in. So I think the next 4 years in the US is going to be a real challenge for most businesses. I think the whole Make America Great thing again completely misunderstands the fact that America cannot stand on its own. It is part of a global economy. It's part of a global system. And therefore you have to be able to interact outside the US. And if countries don't know how to react with you, then that will be a challenge. In fact, I need to preface all of this with, these are not predictions anymore. With geopolitics, something that happened next week that derails us from that road and we go on a completely different road. But I can see it getting into a world where we have another trade war for another couple of years. I can see, because of the instability, companies trying to bring some more of their offshoring to jurisdictions that they can control, that are stable. So you may not want to be in the Middle East to manufacture something. If there is a trade war with China, you may want to bring your production facilities to Canada or Mexico.
I hear you. We have jumped off this timeline, and in many ways, it has felt like that globally since 2016. What kind of impact do you see when it comes to energy markets and supply chains, given this level of volatility and instability?
We are moving into a world whereby energy is going to be way more challenging for us. I think we need to be cautious about how we're managing the energy that we have. We've gone a bit of a pendulum from climate change. We need to do green energy to back to normal fossil fuel energy, back to green energy. And now I'm not quite sure where we're going. Trump seems to be favouring fossil fuels. There's lots of talk around about nuclear would be the way forward. I think that whole thing is a challenge to try and predict and understand at the moment because it is so bold. But I think the one thing that will drive all of that is the need for more of it. And if I'm honest, I'm not a fan of nuclear, but I can see us going nuclear because we've got better other options.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I tend to agree with you. And I feel like one of the things that no one really talks about with nuclear power is that we have not figured out the waste and remediation problem. And that is a limiting factor. It's not just the permitting and site security, which those are non-trivial issues. But the question is, what do you do with all the waste once you create it? And how do you transport it and dispose of it? So in a prior life, I spent a lot of time thinking about that. That is a huge problem that has really not been solved. And the other thing I find interesting in what you're saying too is, on the energy front, I totally agree. And you alluded to it earlier in our conversation about AI. But I do think that with the rise of Elon Musk, who almost seems like he's a shadow vice president in this upcoming term, you have someone who's been a huge advocate for fighting global warming and climate change. In fact, a lot of folks in the technology sector have really been champions and leaders. And so it's interesting to see that kind of forward-looking agenda meeting this more recalcitrant, reactive agenda that Trump has put forward, right? And it feels like that's going to be quite volatile unto itself. Do you have any other thoughts about how that might get reconciled?
I think, if I'm honest, I don't think anyone can reconcile it. I think at some point someone has to back down. And it's either the green energy or it's the fossil fuels. Someone has to back down and there has to be a clear way forward. I don't think you can combine both. I think we've been combining both so far. I think all of the climate change agreements have been talking about combining fossil fuels with electric, with solar, with electric cars, with fossil fuel
Portfolio
cars.
approach. Absolutely.
Yeah, and that needs to come to an end at some point. Otherwise, we are just perpetuating all the issues that we've had. I personally think it has to be electric, but then you've got the electric generation, how we're doing that. And at the moment, Trump seems to be very much backed by the oil and fossil fuel industry. So I can't see that changing for the next few years, at least in the US. Europe, I think, is slightly different. I think Europe's got a much more green approach to it. So that will be there. I'm not really sure where China is. I know China have got a huge number of nuclear power stations, and they've gone away from fossil fuels quite extensively. But with a trade war, does that impact on anyone in the West? I'm not really sure that it does.
That's a great setup because the next topic is tariffs and a trade war. The incoming US President Donald Trump has threatened tariffs on China, as well as the US's largest trading partners, that's Canada and Mexico. If wide-scale tariffs were implemented, I think there is universal belief that will be quite disruptive to our economy and the global economy. That's another potential powder keg of economic implications, at least in my view. What do you think?
I completely agree. It's difficult to predict because Trump had a habit of saying one thing and doing another. And I have heard a lot of people say that Trump is threatening tariffs purely as a negotiating stance, so that he got something to give away when he negotiates. So they might never happen. I think that if there is tariffs and we do get into this trade war, both Mexico and Canada have already had warning shots across the bow of tariffs. So I think if we do get into those tariffs, I think the impact on inflation, on consumer pricing, it will be quite dramatic. I think people don't realize just how dramatic it is going to be. You look at, I don't know about you, but the vast majority of the things that I buy from Amazon come from China at some point. So if there's a trade war with China, then all of that changes. Things won't be available to us. Other things that are available will cost us more. So yeah, I think that whole thing is a bit of a mix. I hope that Trump is using it as a negotiating tactic and it doesn't come to pass. But we do know from his first term that he's not shy about imposing tariffs on anyone. And so it's very possible we're going to be in this world whereby there are trade wars, there are tariffs, whether it's for 3 months, 6 months, or his full presidency, who knows?
Let's switch gears a little bit. One of the other topics we wanted to talk about was workforce. And we'll just touch on this quickly because we've got a couple other things we wanted to get into. Hybrid workforce models have been very popular in the last few years. And at the same time, I still see tons of headlines with CEOs across all sorts of industries that really want folks to be back in the office, and employees continue to be quite resistant to that. AI has an effect here too, right? There's going to be productivity gains. There's also some significant changes that we're seeing in terms of recruitment and talent development that seem to be tied back to AI. What are you seeing when it comes to workforce in this next year?
I think the next year is going to be a really telling year. It's going to be pivotal in a lot of cases. As we mentioned before, with the AI and AI automation and agents taking over a number of functions or working alongside people with a number of functions. And I think how we work will be starting to change. We'll start to see what that looks like at the end of the year. For employee recruitment, I can easily see the first pass being with an AI agent, going through resumes to figure out who we should be hiring and things. I can see retention becoming much more important going forward. You want to keep the good staff that you have. You don't want to keep the bad staff that you have. So I can see that starting to swing. So the retention will be a key element in 2025. They have spoken about the big stay, which is people feeling stuck in resentment because they're stuck in their jobs. And I think if employers want to get the best out of their people, they need to recognize that, and they need to start actually working to actively create environments, cultures where people want to work, they want to be productive, they feel part of the workforce. Otherwise, we're going to easily go from the big stay into the resignation. I think last year, the year before, we had the silent quitting thing. I think that will change, probably not next year, but in the next couple of years. If employers don't start to recognize that their employees are not an AI agent, they are a human being. They have hopes, they have dreams, they want to work, they want to feel valued. They are not just a bum on a seat doing something for you. I think the CEOs who are all saying we need you back in the office, that's 18th century England, to be honest. It's like you'll come in, you sit at a desk at 9 a.m., you'll do what I tell you, and you go home at 5:30 or 6. So I don't really see that working for lots of people. I think it's rattling of sabers and challenging. I don't honestly see that it's a workable solution for most organizations. Hybrid working is here to stay. It isn't going away. And people want to have that work-life balance. Otherwise, they don't want to be working for you. So I think lots of normal mid-sized companies will recognize that, but then they will use AI. They will use different management techniques to make people feel part of this, to make people feel engaged, also to monitor productivity. It may even change that actually what we end up with is a bunch of gig workers. So rather than having a permanent employee, what you have is someone that's been with you for 5 years, but they're on a project by project contract or some other type of contract. And then it's your job to give them an environment and satisfaction that makes them want to stay because they're not tied with you. They don't have any ties. They can go across the road and work for someone else.
I know healthcare is very much on your radar and obviously a huge part of the US economy, for better or for worse. AI, machine learning, and deep learning are actually expected to drive somewhere between $200 billion and $360 billion in healthcare spending just in this next year, according to McKinsey, which I thought was actually pretty tremendous. How do you see healthcare in this next year?
I'm the chairman of a remote telehealth business in the UK, but we operate in Europe as well. I'm also a chairman of a musical therapy business, which does play into my predictions of what's happening this year. And I can see AI playing a big part of this, digital transformation playing a big part of this, and digitization of health outcomes. Lots of digital transformation is more about back-end processes and being much more efficient. Although I don't think the US system is efficient at all. Hopefully it can become much more efficient. I think though digital therapies will become much more to the fore. The music therapy one I mentioned, that's recognizing that frequencies will change your brain patterns. So we can actually calm down patients with pain or dementia. There's lots of research, medical research out there that proves that. So I think that mental health thing is going to start coming to the fore, starting this year coming. And then it'll start to take over as we understand it better and we can use it for patient outcomes more. I think AI will be used for things like smart ring data. Most of us carry something, whether it's an Apple Watch or a Samsung Watch or a ring of some kind, using the AI to actually predict your health, give you better recommendations. I think we're going to start seeing that level of prediction coming from our wearable data as well. So all of that, I think, is coming through genetic profiling. I think an awful lot of that is going to get into personalized medicines, whereby actually, rather than just taking 2 Tylenol or something, we can actually much better prescribe medicines for your treatment and for your genetics to how you will react. So I think all of these things are coming through. A lot of it's going to be driven by AI, because humans are bad at this kind of stuff. I can do it repeatedly, accurately, consistently. And I think that will be a huge thing. So I can see medicine being quite dramatically changed positively in digital therapeutics, digital outcomes being driven by digital technologies. And then if Trump holds to his word, the Obamacare, American Care Act, that seems to be going to get cut back quite significantly. So I think lots of individuals will want to have a cheap alternative that they can do themselves. They can have without involving their health insurer or having to go and pay out of pocket within health organizations. I can see all of these things playing into a really bumper year for healthcare next year.
I think it's so interesting because to me, the regulatory and policy piece really is the wild card there. Just this last week, the CEO of United Healthcare was murdered in the street. And the level of anger and angst, I think, among just average people, all the way up to businesses that shoulder the majority of healthcare spend in the US, I tend to think that it's going to be extremely disruptive next year. And then you've got the question of, well, what happens in terms of the people that Trump is installing? Because whether it's HHS or CDC or the FDA, these are people that are really far outside of kind of the mainstream in either Republican or Democratic circles. And so I see layers of uncertainty here. I do think that the technological piece is really interesting, But at the same time, the US has the worst healthcare outcomes of any developed country, and we spend the most on healthcare. And now our people are pretty angry about it. I would argue rightfully, not that the crime is appropriate at all, but it really feels like things might come to a head in some respect in 2025. Do you agree, or what do you see?
No, I absolutely agree. I think, first of all, shooting the CEO of United Healthcare is never good. That's not the answer. Although I do have a lot of sympathy for people who feel that they've got no other options but to make that type of statement. It's never the answer. And hopefully 2025 will be that change. And I think it's much more of a society change rather than it is a healthcare change. And health insurance has nothing to do with health. It's all about insurance. It's all about managing money. It's all about managing risk. It's all about your entire health system is on an Excel spreadsheet somewhere, managing the risk, the cost benefit return. And that's not really about the healthcare outcomes, but hopefully it can change. The health insurance industry has two choices now. Keep going with what they've been doing, or they can actually make changes. And I think it would be really exciting if they were to start to make changes, and not just superficial changes, but actual kind of genuine. You can see a world whereby a health insurer says, we're going to cap our profit at 5%. There's an organization in the UK, a private medical system in the UK called Bupa. And I believe their profits are capped at 5%. So they have to say yes to all of the treatments that people need. They're medically required to have. Bless you. They're medically required to have, because there's no point in them making more money because they're not allowed to keep it. They're capped. Something like that would be a huge step forward. It's not the result. It's not the answer. But it would be a huge step forward, and I think it would make a lot of people feel it's less manipulated by the healthcare system. But I think that's a society change. And I think that, unfortunately, the guy being shot is the start of that. What we have to do isn't working.
Yeah, it's so sad on so many levels, because it really does seem like it's a huge opportunity to rethink what we're trying to do here. Where is the profit motive appropriate? Where is it inappropriate? There's a balance that we, again, lack, I think, here in the US that maybe other countries have had, which of course there are issues. Not everyone loves national health in the UK, and some of the systems in Canada and other countries have pros and cons too. So not expected.
And just to share my view, I think the NHS in the UK is one of the best health systems in the world, but its management and its administration is shocking. It's got more money at it than it's ever had, and it's less efficient than it's ever been. But I can see a rationale whereby having an insurer which is doing the administration for you would be way more effective, way more efficient. But when you allow that insurer to multiply profit margins exponentially at the cost of providing care, I think that's where it goes skew. So I don't think the UK system necessarily is the answer, although I do like the treatment I get there, the administration of the cost of it doesn't work. The US system seems to have some benefits because it has that supposed efficiency built into it, although the reality is very different.
I was going to say, I think across patients, providers, hospital systems, pharmaceutical, I don't think anyone will say it's efficient, but I hear you. It is like many things in America. It's a big philosophical question, right? We tend to be a very market-oriented country. Most of us really do believe in the free market. And at the same time, it tends to be pretty unpopular to have too much unfettered power. Before we run out of time completely, after a few years of rising interest rates, the Fed has been cutting interest rates. This has a big effect on business here as well as, again, globally. Some of the projections I saw indicate that the benchmark rate will be 3.4% by the end of 2025. I think from a lot of people's perspective, interest rate cuts affecting investment strategies. Do you think that we might return to an era of growth at all costs? I really hope not, because I thought it was incredibly detrimental in terms of building really inefficient business models that we then had to clean up later. So I personally am hoping that's not the case, but what do you think?
Unfortunately, I think we are. And I agree with you. It does mean when you've got too much money out there, and harebrained ideas can get funding and then they go nowhere. It was 2 or 3 months ago when the exchange rate for the Japanese yen changed, and that caused way more impact on the financial markets because all of the investors were borrowing money in Japan for investment in the US, and the exchange rate made that very valuable to them. And it was a really good kind of way of working. So investors will find ways around about an interest rate change. And if the US interest rate comes down, they will start borrowing in the US again. And what most people kind of miss with most private equity, very few private equity firms will give you cash for your equity. It is always equity plus debt. So that they have these mixed models that work for them, and they're very good at it. You can blame them for a lot of the world's woes and for the out and out capitalism, but they're very good at what they do. I think what's more going to impact 2025 is the fact that there is so much dry powder. Ultra high net worths, billionaires, they all have a bunch of money. Warren Buffett has been selling a lot of his assets to give him free cash. I think he's got hundreds of billions in free cash or something. And they were comparing it to the size of economies of small countries as what he has in free cash. So I think lots of the investors have lots and lots of money, and they need to do something with it. They're not going to stick it in the bank and get 1 or 2%. They want to get a return for it. And I think that's going to be the driver for most of the investment activity that's happening. They have to deploy it somewhere. And that will put a lot of pressure on the general partners of private equity VC, even a lot of pressure on M&E work, because you have to do it. And then, fine, in 3 or 5 years' time, you're going to get marked for how good your investment was. Did we get the return on it? And it's not just private equity and VCs, lots of corporate VC funds. They will view this coming year as we've got lots of money. We can give it back to shareholders or we can reinvest it in the business. So I think M&A is going to go through the roof. I think VC money is going to be much more available, and private equity money is going to be much more available as well. It doesn't mean to say they're going to be investing in anything, but it does mean they're going to be investing in a lot of things that they'll be interested in.
What do you see investors doing about all those investments from the last 5 years that are still underwater? I'm speaking of valuations in particular.
I would just merge 2 companies, 3 companies. I would take an underperforming business and use it as a platform and go away on a purchase spree and buy 4 or 5 businesses, group them together. And suddenly what you've got is an underperformer is the platform for something that's used.
To your point, BCG noted that there's something like $2.1 trillion of dry powder just sitting on the books as of this September. Do you see any industries in particular that might be the beneficiaries of all that funding?
I think it's mainly the industries that we've spoken about already. So AI will be huge. Healthcare will be huge. Energy will get a lot of love out of this going forward because of the need for that. What else? Those are the kind of core ones that are driving all the other technology investments. That's where most of the money will go. And unfortunately, I don't think that there's going to be that many companies that you can invest in to achieve a good return from that.
Jim, we always appreciate having you here. It's always such an interesting conversation. Our last question before we let you go, what do you see as the biggest opportunity and the biggest risk coming into 2025?
Oh, the biggest opportunity and the biggest risk is the volatility. So I'm a huge one for, and I always forget what that can stand for: volatility, ambiguity, and complexity, and forget what the other one is. I think what the world we're in is there is nothing certain. Whatever you think your plan is for 2025, it is guaranteed something will come along and derail part of it or all of it. So it's having that flexibility in your plans. Have what you want to try and achieve. Don't have the road in your head as a must. This is the road that we have to go on. It's the outcome you're trying to achieve, and the road will change. The world is just too volatile not to.
Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciated having you here today.
Thanks, Neeta. It's always good chatting. I love it.
Thank you. Thanks so much for listening to Good Revenue. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe to the show, give us a rating, or leave us a review. It helps other listeners find us, and we really appreciate your support. You can also catch full videos and highlights on our YouTube channel.